Have you ever noticed how tired you feel after a simple disagreement? Not just tired in your body, but tired deep inside, the kind of tired that lingers even after the conversation is over. Maybe it was an argument with a spouse about something small, or a sharp exchange with an adult child, or even a quiet but heavy disagreement you replayed over and over in your head while lying in bed at night. For many years, I thought this was just part of life. I believed that speaking my mind, standing my ground, and correcting others was a sign of strength. But somewhere along the way, especially as the years added up, I realized something important. When I stopped arguing, life didn't become empty or dull. It became peaceful in a way I had never known before. That's what I want to talk with you about today. This idea of peace that comes not from winning debates or proving a point, but from choosing calm over conflict. At this stage of life, peace becomes more valuable than being right. Many of us have spent decades working hard, raising families, dealing with responsibilities, and pushing through stress. By the time we reach our later years, the last thing we truly need is constant emotional friction. Yet arguing often becomes a habit without us even realizing it. In this video, I want to share how stepping away from arguments changed my daily life, my relationships, and even the way I feel when I wake up in the morning. And more importantly, how you can begin to experience that same sense of calm without giving up your dignity or your voice. For most of my life, arguing felt automatic. If someone said something I didn't agree with, my mind immediately jumped into defense mode. Words would come out quickly, sometimes sharp, sometimes loud, always certain that I was right. And maybe I often was right, at least in my own eyes. But what I didn't notice back then was the cost. After every argument, there was tension in my chest, tightness in my shoulders, and a strange heaviness that followed me for hours or even days. The argument might have ended, but my body and mind stayed stuck in it. I replayed what I said, what I should have said, and what the other person said that bothered me. That inner noise quietly stole my peace. As I got older, my tolerance for that noise started to fade. I didn't have the same energy to carry emotional battles around. One day, after a particularly pointless argument over something that truly didn't matter, I caught myself thinking, why am I doing this? What am I actually gaining here? The answer surprised me. I wasn't gaining respect. I wasn't gaining closeness. I wasn't even gaining satisfaction. I was only feeding stress. That moment didn't change me overnight, but it planted a seed. I began to notice how often arguments started and how rarely they improved anything. One of the first things I learned was that not every opinion needs to be defended. This was hard for me at first. I had spent years believing that silence meant weakness or agreement. But silence, I discovered, can also mean wisdom. When someone expressed a view I disagreed with, instead of jumping in to correct them, I tried something new. I paused. I listened. Sometimes I simply nodded and let the moment pass. And something remarkable happened. The tension dissolved almost instantly. There was no raised voice, no tight jaw, no lingering bitterness afterward. Just a quiet continuation of the day. I began to see that many arguments are invitations, and we don't have to accept every invitation we're given. Another realization came when I started asking myself a simple question in heated moments. Does this really matter in the long run? Not in the next 5 minutes, but in the next 5 years. Most of the time, the honest answer was no. It didn't matter. The dishes, the small misunderstandings, the differences in habits or opinions, they were not worth the emotional cost. By choosing not to argue, I wasn't giving up my values. I was protecting my peace. And peace, especially as we age, becomes one of our most precious resources. I also noticed a change in my relationships. When I stopped arguing, people around me seemed more relaxed. Conversations felt lighter. There was more laughter, more patience, and less defensiveness. Others didn't feel the need to brace themselves when speaking with me. That shift alone was powerful. It reminded me that peace is not just something we feel inside. It's something we create in the space between ourselves and others. When that space is calm, life feels easier to breathe in. Now, this doesn't mean I stopped caring or stopped having opinions. It simply means I became more selective about when and how I express them. Instead of reacting, I respond. Instead of correcting, I consider. And instead of arguing to win, I choose to understand or let go. This shift didn't make me smaller. In fact, it made me feel stronger, steadier, and more in control of my emotional world. As I continued down this path, I began to understand that many arguments are really about something deeper. Often, they come from fear of not being heard, fear of losing control, or fear of being disrespected. When I learned to address those feelings within myself, the urge to argue softened. I didn't need to prove my worth through conflict anymore. I could feel secure without raising my voice. This brings us to another important piece of the puzzle, one that quietly shapes many of our interactions without us realizing it. It's the habit of needing the last word, and how letting go of that need opens the door to a much gentler way of living. That's where this journey naturally continues, and where an even deeper sense of peace begins to take root. And feel that these insights are meaningful. Please type number 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I warmly invite you to do so, and don't forget to turn on the bell, so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos designed to uplift, inform, and inspire. Your support truly means a lot. It's what keeps us going and allows us to continue sharing thoughtful, helpful content just for you. Now, let's continue this journey together. There's a quiet moment that comes after you stop arguing, and it doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It arrives slowly, almost shyly, like a calm breeze after a long storm. At first, you might not even trust it. You might find yourself waiting for the next disagreement, the next sharp comment, the next need to defend yourself. But then you notice something subtle. Your shoulders feel lighter. Your breathing feels deeper. And your mind, for once, isn't replaying yesterday's conversations on a loop. One of the first things I began to understand during this time was how often I argued out of habit, not necessity. For years, I thought speaking up meant correcting people, pointing out what was wrong, or making sure my opinion was heard. I believed that if I stayed silent, I would be overlooked or disrespected. But as I got older, I started to see that many arguments weren't about truth at all. They were about control, about wanting to feel right, or wanting someone else to admit they were wrong. And once I saw that, it became harder to justify the emotional cost. I remember a conversation with a family member that would have turned into a full-blown argument in the past. They said something I didn't agree with. I felt that familiar heat rise in my chest, that urge to jump in and correct them. But this time, I paused. I asked myself a simple question: will this matter to me tomorrow? And even more importantly, is peace more valuable right now than being right? I chose to listen instead of react. The conversation moved on, and something surprising happened. We both left the room feeling calm. No tension. No bitterness. That was new for me. As I practiced this more, I realized that letting go of arguments didn't mean letting go of my values. It meant choosing when and how to express them. There's a difference between standing up for yourself and trying to win every disagreement. When you're younger, winning can feel important. It can feel like proof that you're smart or strong. But later in life, strength begins to look different. It starts to look like restraint. Like wisdom. Like knowing when silence speaks louder than words. Another change I noticed was how much energy arguments had been stealing from me. Emotional energy is just as real as physical energy, and after 60 or 70 years on this planet, you become very aware of where yours goes. I used to feel exhausted after certain conversations, even if they were short. My body would tense up, my heart would race, and afterward I'd feel drained. When I stopped engaging in unnecessary conflict, that energy stayed with me. I had more patience, more focus, and even more joy for simple things like a walk in the afternoon or a quiet cup of tea. There's also something deeply freeing about realizing that you don't need everyone to agree with you. For a long time, I believed that disagreement meant rejection. If someone didn't see things my way, I took it personally. But the truth is, everyone carries their own history, their own fears, and their own beliefs. Once I accepted that, I stopped trying to change people. I started allowing them to be who they are, just as I wanted the same courtesy. That acceptance softened my relationships in ways I never expected. You may notice that when you stop arguing, people sometimes respond differently to you. Some may feel disarmed by your calm. Others may even feel safer opening up because they don't expect judgment or resistance. I've had deeper, more meaningful conversations since I stopped arguing than I ever did when I was trying to prove a point. Listening creates space, and in that space, real connection can grow. Of course, this doesn't mean becoming passive or silent in situations that truly matter. There are times when speaking up is necessary, especially when it comes to your boundaries or your well-being. The difference is intention. When you speak from a place of calm clarity rather than anger or ego, your words land differently. You're no longer fighting, you're communicating. And that shift changes everything. I also had to learn to argue less with myself. This was perhaps the hardest part. For years, my mind was full of self-criticism. I would replay mistakes, question my choices, and judge myself harshly for things I couldn't change. That inner argument was constant, and it robbed me of peace just as much as any external conflict. When I began to let go of that habit, to treat myself with the same kindness I was offering others, something beautiful happened. I felt lighter inside. More forgiving. More at ease with who I am now. There's a quiet confidence that comes with this way of living. It's not loud or showy. It doesn't need to announce itself. It comes from knowing that you don't have to prove anything anymore. You've lived enough life to know who you are. You don't need validation through conflict. You don't need to win conversations to feel worthy. That realization alone can bring an incredible sense of freedom. As the days went by, I noticed how peaceful moments started to string together. Mornings felt calmer. Evenings felt softer. I slept better, not because my life was suddenly perfect, but because my mind wasn't constantly on guard. I wasn't rehearsing arguments or anticipating the next disagreement. I was present. And presence, I've learned, is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves at this stage of life. This sense of peace didn't come from changing the world around me. It came from changing how I responded to it. And once that shift happened, it opened the door to something even deeper, something that reshaped how I see freedom, aging, and what truly matters as the years move forward. As the years went by, I started noticing something quiet but powerful happening inside me. The more I stopped arguing, the more space opened up in my life. Space in my mind, space in my heart, and even space in my relationships. I didn't realize it at first, but peace isn't something you chase by winning arguments. Peace shows up when you decide that your inner calm matters more than being right. There was a time when I believed that if I didn't speak up, I would be ignored or taken advantage of. Maybe you felt that too. We grow up learning that standing our ground means pushing back, proving our point, making sure others know where we stand. And for many years, that worked, at least on the surface. But over time, I noticed the cost. After an argument, even if I won, I felt tired. Drained. My chest felt tight, my thoughts kept replaying the conversation, and sleep didn't come easily. That's when I started asking myself a different question. What am I really protecting here? My pride, or my peace? One of the biggest changes came when I learned to pause before responding. Not a long pause that feels awkward, just a gentle moment where I let the urge to react pass through me. When someone said something that rubbed me the wrong way, I used to jump in right away. Now, I take a breath and ask myself if this moment truly needs my energy. Most of the time, it doesn't. That pause alone has saved me from countless unnecessary conflicts. It's amazing how often situations resolve themselves when you don't fuel them. I also learned that silence doesn't mean agreement. This was a hard one for me. I used to think that if I didn't argue back, I was saying the other person was right. But silence can simply mean, I choose not to fight. It's a way of stepping back and saying, this conversation isn't worth disturbing my peace. And strangely enough, when I stopped arguing, people started listening more when I did speak. My words carried more weight because they weren't thrown around in every disagreement. Another shift happened when I stopped trying to change people. For a long time, I believed that if I could just explain things better, others would finally understand and do things differently. But people change only when they're ready, not when we push them. Once I accepted that, a huge burden lifted. I no longer felt responsible for correcting everyone's opinions or behavior. I focused instead on how I wanted to show up, calm and steady, regardless of what others did. This didn't mean I stopped caring. In fact, it was the opposite. When I let go of arguing, I became more compassionate. I listened more. I noticed that behind many harsh words are fear, stress, or old wounds. When you see that, arguing feels less necessary. You realize that kindness, or even quiet understanding, often does more than a sharp reply ever could. Peace also came from choosing my battles carefully. Some things matter deeply, like your values, your safety, and your dignity. Those are worth standing up for, calmly and clearly. But many everyday disagreements aren't about those things at all. They're about habits, preferences, or different ways of seeing the world. Once I stopped treating every disagreement like a personal attack, life felt lighter. I saved my energy for what truly mattered. Over time, I noticed changes in my body too. My shoulders weren't as tense. My breathing felt deeper. Even my blood pressure improved. It's incredible how much arguing lives not just in the mind, but in the body. When you let go of constant conflict, your body finally gets a chance to rest. Looking back now, I wish I had learned this lesson sooner, but I also understand why it took so long. Letting go of arguing isn't about giving up your voice. It's about using it wisely. It's about realizing that peace is not weakness. It's strength, quiet and steady. If you're watching this and thinking about the arguments that still drain you, know that it's never too late to choose differently. You don't have to change everything overnight. Start small. Pause. Breathe. Let one argument go and notice how you feel afterward. That feeling is your guide. I'd love to hear from you. Have you noticed how much energy arguments take from your life? Or have you already started choosing peace over being right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might help someone else who's struggling with the same thing. If this message resonated with you, please give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. We share conversations like this often, all about finding calm, meaning, and joy at this stage of life. Thank you for spending this time with me. Remember, peace isn't something you find somewhere else. It begins the moment you decide that your inner calm is worth protecting. Here's to quieter minds, lighter hearts, and a more peaceful life, no matter our age.